In terms of an agenda for today, we've designed the session to be in a bit of a discussion and dialogue style. We'll be starting with an introduction to Verité and the Streams project and our partnerships with Better Cotton and the Responsible Sourcing Network, or RSN. I'm going to provide high-level introductions to both Better Cotton and RSN's operational models and their work on the Streams project with Verité. And then I'll engage in discussion with both Nick and Patricia to explore the traceability pilot activities that their organizations have been undertaking with Streams and their reflections and insights coming off of these activities. We'll reserve the last 15 minutes of the session for questions. I'm going to be packing a lot into the a lot of information into the introduction piece in order to get us kind of quickly to the interesting part where we can have a bit of dialogue. The Supply Chain Tracing and Engagement Methodologies, or Streams project, as I mentioned, is led by Verité with funding provided by the U.S. Department of Labor. Verité is an NGO based in the United States, for those of you who are not familiar with us, with global operations and a mission to ensure safe, fair, and legal working conditions for workers worldwide. We aim to provide knowledge and tools to eliminate the most serious labor abuses in global supply chains. We have a history of work in over 70 countries and partner with corporations, governments, and civil society to better understand the nature and root causes of labor rights violations in supply chains and to build effective approaches to remedying these violations. The Streams project has an objective of increasing the downstream tracing of goods made with forced or child labor so that companies, advocates, and government officials can leverage innovative traceability approaches to strengthen due diligence and improve conditions for workers in global supply chains. Through this project, we want to be encouraging companies and others to be thinking about approaches to traceability really in terms of very specific goals and objectives around labor rights and decent work, and to really anchor approaches to traceability in a due diligence framework. There are three main pillars of activity in the Streams project. We are conducting a set of field pilots of traceability approaches to support sustainability and due diligence. These pilots are the core focus of the session today, and they are being conducted with our core project partners, Better Cotton and RSN Yes, in a set of cotton and garment supply chains in India. The learnings from these pilots will ultimately be shared out in a public report for the benefit of all stakeholders. Streams is also producing a traceability matrix, which is going to be a public-facing web-based resource that will provide guidance on identifying traceability approaches that meet specific supply chain due diligence goals for labor impact. And finally, we aim for all of our work with the India field pilots, with our partners, and also the matrix to be generating findings and insights that can be relevant for supply chains beyond just the garment sector. And the Streams project will be creating additional resources and tools based on these learnings that will offer practical and broadly applicable guidance, we hope, on using traceability to improve working conditions across a variety of sectors and geographies. Verité has positioned this Streams project really at the intersection of supply chain traceability and due diligence for labor rights and decent work. We recognize that increased supply chain traceability does not automatically lead to better working conditions and less child labor or forced labor. We believe that traceability can and should be a foundational building block of a robust labor rights due diligence system. And that's why we've anchored our pilots of traceability approaches with our sustainability and due diligence partners, Better Cotton and RSN Yes. We have two core pillars of field pilot activity with Streams, one with Better Cotton, and we call this field pilot the Cotton Chain of Custody pilot, and the other with RSN's Yes Standards for Yarn Ethically and Sustainably Sourced, and we're calling this the Mid-Tier Gatekeeper Field Pilot. Working with both RSN Yes and Better Cotton enables Streams to overlap multiple approaches to traceability and transparency in specific supply chain segments. And we hope that this kind of overlapping and kind of stacked approach is going to help clarify how different traceability tools and approaches can complement each other and clarify also the value brought by traceability to sustainability and due diligence, and likewise the value brought by sustainability and due diligence initiatives to the kinds of traceability objectives that retailers and brands and others may have at different tiers of the supply chain. In terms of the two field pilots, I will highlight them both briefly. The cotton chain of custody pilot being led by Better Cotton is kind of anchored in Better Cotton's goal of extending its current system for segregating its physical Better Cotton from farm to gin and using mass balance from gin onward in the supply chain, extending that to look at different approaches for a chain of custody for physical Better Cotton beyond the gin, and eventually through to the finished garment. Better Cotton's goal is to design a scalable, credible, and affordable solution to making physical Better Cotton traceable to origin. The Streams Cotton Chain of Custody pilot is really anchored in this goal. And we are working with Better Cotton and supporting them in identifying specific traceability methods and technologies that will not only be adoptable and scalable by suppliers in downstream cotton supply chains, but that can ultimately also bring and drive value for producers and workers along the supply chain. There are three main components to the traceability system that Better Cotton is currently piloting with Streams: a digital chain of custody, approaches to digital chain of custody platforms, an auditing system, and physical tracers. Through Streams, Better Cotton is currently piloting multiple approaches in downstream cotton supply chains in India over the course of 2023, looking at developing some new physical chain of custody models for both physical segregation and controlled blending, piloting the use of two different digital chain of custody platforms, piloting the use of two additive physical tracers that can provide that kind of added layer of assurance of the presence of physical Better Cotton, and new approaches for auditing, assurance, data governance, and security. You can find more details about Better Cotton's traceability pilots on the Streams website. In terms of the mid-tier gatekeeper Streams pilot with RSN Yes, RSN Yes's initiative for yarn ethically and sustainably sourced aims to create an industry-wide due diligence program for yarn spinners and fabric mills to identify and address cotton produced with forced labor in the supply chain. Yes takes as its core the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible supply chains in the garment and footwear sector, and outlines management systems that spinners and fabric mills should be undertaking to source cotton responsibly in alignment with the OECD's six-step framework. Yes outlines the policies, procedures, supplier management, inventory controls, risk assessment, and mitigation measures that spinners and fabric mills need to implement to be conformant and to be sourcing cotton responsibly. The aim of the Streams field pilot with RSN Yes is to support the growth and expansion of this due diligence initiative and to demonstrate the traceability functions that can be achieved by such a due diligence initiative, as well as to gain insight on how traceability technologies can support mid-tier suppliers in performing due diligence for responsible cotton sourcing. RSN Yes's core Streams activities include a build out of its Yes standard system, the existing spinner standard and a new fabric standard were piloted already through Streams with a set of spinners and fabric mills in India in 2021 and 22. Yes has now finalized a standard for fabric mills and a revised standard for spinning mills that were both released in September 2022. Through Streams, Yes is also, or Streams is supporting Yes also to build models and systems for capacity building and third-party verification. And finally, Streams is supporting two the piloting of two primary traceability technologies to support YES implementation. One is technology for digital supply chain mapping and risk assessment, and we are piloting this in partnership with our streams partner SourceMap to look at how the SourceMap tool and approaches to digital supply chain mapping and risk assessment can support YES implementation by spinners and fabric mills, and also piloting isotope tracing to verify cotton origins. So we're in the final selection process for an isotope tracing partner for the pilot. These technologies will both be piloted by a set of YES implementing suppliers in India in 2023. And you can access more information about RSN's traceability work also on the Streams website and the RSN website. While the focus of this side session is on the field pilots that I just described, I also wanted to just very briefly highlight some other aspects of the Streams project. A core output of our project is what I mentioned previously, the Streams Traceability Matrix. This web-based publicly available resource is going to be launched this spring. We're very excited about it. It will aim to describe core traceability methods as they relate to due diligence and sustainability goals for labor impact specifically. And we hope that this resource will help users to identify specific supply chain traceability methods and technologies for addressing relevant forced labor and child labor risks in a diverse set of upstream and downstream supply chains. You can sign up to receive more news about our traceability matrix at our website, and the link is listed here on the slide, verite.org/streams. And finally, just to reiterate again that following on the release of the traceability matrix and at the conclusion of the field pilots with Better Cotton and RSN YES, the Streams project will be producing more resources and tools to share out the learnings from our work on the matrix and with our partners on these field pilots, and to kind of apply those learnings more broadly, and then also to convene conversations around key traceability topics and challenges that we identify through our work. So with that introduction and kind of laying of the landscape of the Streams project and our pilots with Better Cotton and RSN, we'll now move into the dialogue and discussion phase. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and see if I can get myself organized. Okay. We'll start off with a discussion with Nick Sexton from Better Cotton. And Nick, just kind of taking that introduction that I provided and just taking it a little bit further, I wanted to first just ask you to just share, as a sustainability initiative, why is Better Cotton interested in traceability? What do you think traceability can do to help you achieve your goals? What has kind of led you to the place you're at now in terms of looking to really do these pilots and work on models for extending that chain of custody for physical Better Cotton?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Erin. And hello, everyone. My name is Nick Sexton. I'm the Traceability Change Manager at Better Cotton, and it's great to be here today. So, for those who don't know, Better Cotton is a farmer-centric organisation. So we focus by working with farmers and farming communities to improve sustainability standards, but also working practices as well. So that is still our mission and continues to be our mission, and is where our focus is. But Erin, as you rightly said, we're drawing more attention and focus of our work to the supply chain in general due to the emergence. And yeah, sorry, I appreciate my audio isn't perfect, but it's we tried some testing before and it's a bit, unfortunately, it's as good as it's going to get. So I will speak slowly and clearly, so hopefully you'll all get what I'm speaking about. So with the emerging legislation we're seeing in the US and the EU, there's an increasing need for retailers and brands who are selling products in those regions to demonstrate that they know the origins of products. And this includes products like garments that contain cotton as well. Now, better cotton has scaled quite greatly to have farmers in 23 countries, and we represent about 20% of cotton produced across the world. So to ensure that farmers still have access to those regulated markets, we're working really hard to make sure that Better Cotton can offer a traceability service to retailers and brands. But this is a really new space for us, so it's been great working with yourself, Erin, to understand where what we need to do and what the next steps are, to make sure that we're making mistakes now in pilot phase and not making those mistakes when we go live, which is where the India pilot has come into play.
And Nick, just kind of, and unfortunately, as Nick was describing, we apologize for the audio. Nick's audio, we're not sure why it's not clear, but I think it's as good as it's going to get. So someone's suggesting maybe Malvina closed captioning to assist. I don't know how easy that is to implement. But Nick will speak kind of slowly and clearly so that hopefully we can make the best of the somewhat muffled audio. So thinking about that sort of change management piece, I'm curious, and you and I were just in India speaking with some suppliers about their experience so far in implementing some of the traceability tools that you all are piloting. How have you tried to sort of gauge and understand how suppliers are kind of taking this on and the different kind of factors and thinking through how disruptive this may be or may not be for suppliers in kind of adopting these new requirements?
Yeah, great question. From a supply perspective, we try to make the changes as minimally disruptive as possible. The reason for that being is that we want traceability to be something that as many suppliers as possible can be involved in. And we want to make sure that the solutions that we are developing can work at scale as well. So we're making sure the changes are as small as possible. It means that more suppliers can make that transition. In India context, as you said, Erin, for the last 2 weeks, we've been visiting suppliers to have these conversations, and the main changes that we see coming are sort of twofold. One being an operational change, so how they physically segregate better cotton from conventional cotton and other fibers. And for what we've seen so far, it feels like a lot of suppliers are very well set up for this. The ones that we've been speaking to have quite sophisticated inventory tracking systems. And they've also demonstrated that they already work with other standards, such as organic, to meet their requirements. So it's, in a way, nothing too new, those operational challenges. It will just be a test of if they can work at the scale for better cotton, which is, quite significant volumes of cotton. The second change is more of an administrative one. So you mentioned digital platforms that we're testing in India. We're testing 2 of these because we have 5 supply chains involved. So we split the supply chains up to test these digital platforms across different supply chains. And there is a bit of an administrative job required to complete traceability. So there's lots of things like documentation that evidence if a chain of custody model has been followed to maintain physical traceability. And that means that as we move forward, there'll be many more documents to demonstrate physical traceability. And all of these need to be provided on a digital platform. So these can be monitored, checked, audited, and that retailers and brands have the evidence and confidence that physical traceability has been met. So those are kind of the 2 main changes we see coming forward. But the key thing with any change is that suppliers have to be motivated and aware and wanting the change first to be able to go forth and do it. And we've seen in the India pilot, the key ingredient has been retailers and brands and other supplier nodes actively engaging each other and speaking together and making sure that they're being really clear on what demand they're forecasting, what volumes are needed and by when. This is the clear information that suppliers need to make sure that they are set up and ready for traceability. they understand why it's needed. They can see the legislation coming down the hill, and they want to make sure they are ready for it. They just need to know how ready they need to be and by when. So it's something we're quite confident suppliers can meet, and we've learned a lot of lessons from this pilot so far, which we're applying for our next steps.
Yeah, and in terms of that kind of signaling of demand piece, it might be interesting to just talk a little bit about any differences you may have seen and how that has gone in the 5 different supply chains that you've been working in, and kind of any kind of key pieces of learning that you've emerged from. You mentioned rightly, the signaling from retailers and brands is going to be key, and this relates in part to kind of identifying volumes. I'm curious if there have been any differences in approaches there and in the traceability work that you've done so far, and what that's telling you about kind of the way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's quite a diversity of supply chains in the pilot. We have some that are very vertically integrated and some that are very node by node. So there's many different suppliers involved. And we've noticed in the latter example that it's been quite difficult to get engagement the further up the supply chain you go from the retailer and brand. And we have 2 examples of those quite complex supply chains, where one has a trader, a link trader between spinner and gin, and the other doesn't. And we've noticed in the former, when a trader is present, that they can act as that sort of engagement lever or mechanism to communicate those requirements to ginners, which, when you don't have that sort of influential node within a supply chain, it can make it significantly more challenging. But that's where we've seen the spinner in that example really step up to the plate and evolve their role to be much more about conversation and sort of more regular touch bases with the ginner to make sure that cotton is arriving in the volumes required at the right time as well. So where we do have those fragmented supply chains, all it means is that it's not just on the retailer and brand to have an engagement role, it's on all supply chain actors to do that. And I think that's something that, whilst it's worked in a perspective of 5 supply chains in a pilot in India, it's something that we're thinking about, of how does that work actually at scale when you've got a retailer and brand sourcing from dozens, if not hundreds, of suppliers. And that's sort of our next step, is to think about how does that communication and engagement really ramp up for when we want to go live with traceability.
And thinking too about just the experiences of different suppliers in adopting these different requirements. You'd mentioned many suppliers are already doing a lot of the traceability work, essentially. So it's really just figuring out how to position the requirements and the new platforms in a way that isn't too disruptive. But I'm curious if you have heard much from suppliers on, how they think about potential costs of taking on these new requirements, and how that might be communicated out.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had cost is something that, as in any supply chain, the per unit cost of anything goes down the more something is ordered and the more something is standardized. So we've seen in different supply chains in the pilot that some retailers and brands have opted to source very low quantities of cotton, or better cotton, and in other supply chains they've been sourcing quite high volumes. And the feedback we've got loud and clear from suppliers over the last couple of weeks when we've been in India speaking with them face to face is that if you're sourcing a large volume of cotton, those changes that do require energy, time, and money to implement to meet traceability requirements are much more easier to swallow, and are also sort of much cheaper per metric ton of cotton that you're then going to be physically tracing through that supply chain. So suppliers are saying that there is going to be a cost to this. There's going to be an operational cost to segregate physical cotton, whether that be things like storage, and there's also going to be an administrative cost to logging transactions digitally and maintaining that paperwork and that paper trail. But they are happy to take on that cost if the volumes are sufficient for it to be worth their while to do it. So it is practically a business decision for them. And these are companies that work on very tight margins. So we do need to be very conscious that when we move towards traceability, that it's an economically viable option for them, to make it one that can be scaled.
Well, we're almost, it's almost time to kind of switch gears and ask a few questions and dialogue with Patricia. But before we do, I had wanted to ask you a question about assurance, but I think I'm going to parking lot that for now. And just for the benefit of the participants on the line with us today, Nick, I think it would be interesting to talk just a little bit about your plans for scale and your plans for go live, and then also kind of looking out a little bit further too, how you see your sort of traceability journey at Better Cotton evolving, and then ultimately, what will be the relationship between these new traceability mechanisms and your claims framework? I know this is a complex question, but just to sort of signal how you're moving through that process of kind of thinking about that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll break it down in that we are preparing for what we call go live later this year. So we're looking around the October to December period. And what go live means is it's the opportunity when a Jinner at the very beginning of supply chain can make their first physically traceable transaction on the Better Cotton platform, which is our digital platform that we currently use to track our currently only one chain of custody model mass balance. We're creating a new part of that to be able to track digital physical Better Cotton transactions. When we go live with Better Cotton later this year, we will be asking for those transactions to be captured, and we'll also be asking for our new chain of custody standard to be followed, which will be released around March or April time of this year. So suppliers should have plenty of time to prepare for that, and we're also developing lots of guidance following questions and challenges we've had with adoption of the standard in the India pilot. That's really informing the support that we're developing at the moment for suppliers to be able to adopt this. Around when we go live as well, that's when our new claims framework is going to be released. So we're busy in the background working with a lot of suppliers and retailers and brands to understand what are their needs for a claims framework. Because at the minute we do not allow on product claims that say that a product contains Better Cotton, because due to our mass balance system, the cotton loses identity as it goes through the supply chain. It's more of a credit system to track volumes. But of course, when physical traceability goes live, we want to be offering on product claims that say a product contains Better Cotton from an origin, whether that be India or another country that we go live with. At the minute, we're still defining the countries for go live later this year, but on that list is India. So we are planning to take the learnings from the pilot and apply it to go live with India traceability later this year at the very end of 2023, which is really exciting. So I'm going to take some annual leave shortly, so I have a big rest before that point. And on your final point of your question, which is around what next, well, we want to make sure that achieving traceability isn't just the finished point. That's the start for us. We're taking sort of little steps in that direction to be able to trace Better Cotton, but we really want to get to a place where we can start to link the cotton in the product to the impact it's made at the farm. That is the sort of the ultimate ambition. Yeah. This isn't something we think we can achieve until maybe 2030 or beyond. So it's a long-term goal, but we're working towards that now. So that's kind of have that in the back of your mind as what we're working to, but it's a long way off yet.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really exciting and really kind of at the essence of Verité's kind of interest and inspiration for streams is to kind of look at those frameworks and how they can ultimately move toward that connection between the cotton that's being sourced and that impact at farm level, like you were just saying. All right, so switching gears a little bit, we'll dive into the mid-tiers. Welcome also to Patricia Jurowitz, founder and CEO of the Responsible Sourcing Network. Patricia, I think I'll just kick off by asking you, so again, thinking about the work that you've been doing under streams and this kind of journey that we've been taking, looking at how you kind of demonstrating the value that due diligence initiative holds for traceability objectives, and likewise what traceability can do for due diligence. What have you learned so far from the streams journey, and what are your sort of key insights around that relationship between major due diligence initiative like YES and these kind of various and vast kind of traceability technologies, approaches that are kind of an increasing part of the landscape for responsible sourcing?
Yeah, thanks, Erin, and thanks to Verité for inviting me to this webinar today. I think so far we've seen more of where due diligence can assist the technology, though, and with the testing and the piloting of technology later this year, I think we'll see more where some of those specific technologies could assist in the due diligence approach. And our YES, Yarn Ethically and Sustainably Sourced initiative is really focused on management systems. And we see that really as the foundation for applying technologies. A lot of technologies are very specific to specific product and very much the segregated traceability approach. So it's that, physical cotton kind of going through the whole system. And so if you have management systems in place that are very robust and procedures and processes for tracking all of the cotton that's coming into the spinning facility, for example, or all the yarn that's going into a fabric mill, the relationships you have with those suppliers, managing all your transactions. Inventory is very well managed at spinning mills in particular, because everything is based on the weight and following and accounting for all the fiber so that you're making the most of it. And by having those systems in place, then when the request comes for specific information, specific documentation for a specific lot of yarn, for example, then the facility should be able to provide it because they have the systems in place to provide that kind of information. What I think will be interesting is seeing how a spot check of isotope testing could assist in confirming and, for example, if a fabric mill is buying yarn and they're told that there's certain cotton in that yarn, it could be spot checked with isotope testing, for example, to back up that claim. I think the source map mapping tool is interesting because it will help those facilities look at and manage all of their suppliers, and then putting a risk assessment overlay on top of that will also help in really managing those risks, especially if there's a lot of suppliers.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's so interesting to think about that kind of relationship between the management systems that YES kind of lays out and the types of traceability requirements that that facilities are increasingly seeing. I'm thinking, Patricia, it might actually be helpful to just back up and talk a little bit about the risk, the approach to kind of risk prioritization that YES takes. And again, and of course, that's linked also to the source map pilot that we're going to be undertaking this year, looking at how source map can be helpful to suppliers in doing that kind of risk prioritization. But, curious to just have you talk a little bit about why risk prioritization is so important and how that features in the YES system and to the kinds of, claims or assurances that can be provided by YES.
Yeah, well, and, we see that aligned with the OECD framework, because there's a lot of risks out there and you can't take on everything all at once. So really identifying the most salient, the most harmful activities that a supplier may be linked to, a spinner or mill might be linked to. So how do you identify those risks? How do you know where to put your energy first? And it is part of our YES standard that the spinner or the mill has to develop a risk mitigation plan, which would lay out and show, over time that those risks are being identified and addressed, and working with local communities to do that. So really the assessment first, it's really understanding where the risks exist first. And so I think there still needs to be a lot of work done in really understanding what the risks are, what the drivers are, and how to address them, how to work with local communities in addressing them. We've on our website, we have a sample procedure for starting out looking at higher risk countries or regions, and then you want to try to narrow down, as you can. For if the facility is sourcing from a lower risk country, then let's not focus on that right now. Let's just focus on where the risks are to address those. And then knowing more from your suppliers, what are they doing to assess their own risks, depending who you're buying from, if it is a spinning mill or if it is a gin or a trader, how are they also looking at mitigating risk in their own supply chains and with their own sourcing strategies. And so depending on the number of transactions you have a year, I know Nick was just referencing sourcing from lots of suppliers, especially in places like Pakistan and India, where you have many, many smallholder farmers. Trying to figure out how to focus will be really important.
Absolutely.
And I am sorry, the last thing I'll say about that is I'm interested in seeing how these traceability tools will actually benefit these mid-tier suppliers, not just brands and retailers, but also how can we make sure that they're helping out the facilities and the factory management to identify their risks and address them.
Absolutely. Just to take it a little bit further, thinking about the kind of full spectrum of the OECD framework, I'm curious to hear your reflections on that kind of relationship between due diligence and traceability in not only the risk prioritization, but also the kind of identifying and providing remedy for potential harm, and that kind of aspect also of the YES system, sort of how you see YES evolving, I would say, toward that piece around not only having the management systems in place, doing that risk prioritization, but also identifying and addressing harm, and then also that relationship between identifying, addressing harm, and traceability technologies.
Well, I think, we're at the very beginning stages of that, but where we have a number of different worker voice apps that are already out there. I think it will be interesting to see how technology could assist workers in either filing grievances or making their voice known and heard of what the conditions are conditions and human rights and labor rights being met or not. And when the facility, at least from the YES perspective, is implementing its risk mitigation plan, it is required to work with local stakeholders to create that plan and implement it. And that's where I think then you'll start seeing these various technologies come together. So as there's more understanding and the linkages to the GINs and therefore to the farmers, or at least the farmers in a certain area, and if that could then be linked up with grievance mechanisms that more people have access to, more opportunity could be given to actually addressing the problems, as well as more data can be collected, so that if local governments need to be involved, having a better understanding of where the risks are. Are they more with migrant communities or, certain aspects of the population that there's higher risks? Having that data and understanding, where that harm is occurring will allow then the prevention and mitigation. So we want to get to the prevention and mitigation, but
Right.
I think having more transparency in place and collecting more data will help us get there.
So we have a couple more minutes for kind of specific questions for RSNES, and then I'm going to open it up and see if we have any questions from our participants today, our attendees. Patricia, I wanted to ask you kind of to bring it back a little bit and tie up the relationship between the work that Better Cotton is doing and the work that RSNES is doing with the Streams Initiative. The place where we see this kind of most concretely is in this concept of controlled blending, which has just been referenced in the chat. As Nick and I think both mentioned, Better Cotton is developing some guidelines for chain of custody for controlled blending of physical Better Cotton with other cotton at a given spinning or fabric mill facility. And we've been having some dialogue between RSNES and Better Cotton, looking at the potential value that might be provided by RSNES as a mid-tier due diligence initiative, implementing management systems for responsible sourcing that could provide some additional assurances for the conventional cotton that might be blended with Better Cotton or another preferred fiber in a given supply facility. So Patricia, I'm just interested to hear kind of your reflections on how you see RSNES situated relative to this concept of controlled blending, and what would be your hopes for what we might see in terms of some experimentation and embracing of that of yes and the controlled blending.
Yeah, it's actually quite exciting, and I think that for spinning mills in particular are going to be interested in it because even with physical Better Cotton, there's not enough of it available, or maybe it's not available at the quality characteristics and volumes that certain facilities are looking at, and so they're likely going to be blending it with conventional cotton. And same with recycled cotton or organic cotton or others, is that you may not always have that ability to have 100% product, or to reach the quality you're looking for. You're going to have to be blending it with other conventional cottons or non-preferred cotton. And that's where I do think that there's a great opportunity, since yes is based on management systems and looking at really ensuring that any cotton originating in higher risk regions does have those additional enhanced due diligence components to it. And if the cotton's originating in lower risk countries, at least for forced labor, you have to prove that it's coming from that country of origin, but you don't have to add on that enhanced due diligence and know more specifics about the gin it originates at, for example. And so this gives us the opportunity that if it's a yes conformant facility, that they're managing their risks, that they're working towards only having low risk cotton, whether it's originating from a low risk country or a high risk country, and then the mixing and matching could happen. Maybe that segregated cotton requirement is coming from the customer. And so therefore you want to be able to say, yes, there is a certain percentage of that Better Cotton or other, specific cotton in that product. But then the conventional cotton, at least you'll know that it's not contributing to harm. And it gives the facility then more flexibility to be able to do the blending and mixing, et cetera, to reach the price point and the quality that's being requested from the customer. So I'm excited about where we can go with those pilots and testing.
And Nick, I think also it would be great to hear from your perspective. I know you dropped a little note in the chat in response to a question around this, but just to hear from Better Cotton side, how you think about control blending in that kind of universe of traceability options that you're looking at, and the role that it could potentially play in providing a pathway for suppliers and transitioning to a more fully physically segregated model, and sort of how you've seen that so far unfolding.
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, do I sound better? I've changed some of the settings in the background, but I don't think
Yeah, you still sound kind of the same. I don't know what it is.
I'm sorry, everyone. My voice is usually better than this. It's a great question. As Patricia rightly said, when we go live with traceability, we are expecting to have these issues of, having the right physical better cost in terms of quality in the right place and at the right times. There are bound to be bottlenecks in that supply. Despite being representing around 20% of global production, there are going to be moments in time when likely the better physical better cotton maybe doesn't meet the fiber quality needs of the consumer, or it doesn't meet the volume needs, or both. And so we see control blending as a bit of a sort of transitory chain of custody model to help suppliers meet the needs of retailers and brands, as well as making sure that they still can receive business for traceable better cotton that's being demanded by the supply chain. So it's one we expect to see adopted quite highly at the beginning. In saying that, a learning we've seen from the India pilot is that segregation has been far and away the more preferred chain of custody model, because it means that you can say this product contains 100% physical better cotton sourced in India. So it's that, from a claims perspective, as you said before, is one that's quite desirable to retailers and brands and other agents in the supply chain. But we do have to think about some of the practicalities and the realities of the supply chain. So that's why control blending will exist as an option.
Great, thanks, Nick. All right, so we can move to questions. If anyone would like to ask a question, please do feel free to raise your hand. Looks like there have been some questions put in the Q&A. So we have a question from Paul Rowland. Is transparency through disclosure of traceability data also part of the project? That would allow independent verification, but especially at the cotton farmer stage could be problematic if it involves smallholder farmers or smallholder farms that are also people's homes. So I think, Paul, I don't know if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a bit more, but just, to start off, I think, Tricia and Nick, the essence of the question is just what elements of traceability data, and I think this applies especially for better cotton, might be made available in different forms, either for independent verification or for access to the broader stakeholder community.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we're thinking quite a lot about at the moment, because when we go live with traceability, and as we've seen with the India pilot, we're going to make it optional for suppliers to disclose their identity and exact location to the retailer and brand who is procuring that better cotton. But we all know all that information in the background. So every site where better cotton is processed will have to be, or stored, will have to be registered with us. And so we will know all of those details. And it's optional for the supplier to provide those. If they don't provide those, the retailer and brand will just have the reassurance that the cotton is from an origin, and they'll know the origin country of that supplier. When it comes to a monitoring question, again, because better cotton will hold that information, we can coordinate the monitoring of those facilities to make sure they're adhering to the chain of custody standard and all of the checks and balances that we need to maintain. So yeah, that's how we're currently going at the moment. Again, it's not live yet, so there's likely to be some tweaks and changes to that, but that's the current plan in place.
Thanks, Nick. And I'm seeing some kind of amplification of Paul's question too, just around traceability in agricultural products more generally, and some questions around how we are going to be kind of translating learnings to other sectors. And so that is something that is a goal of the Streams project, is to take some of these learnings and do some translating out and convening more discussions and roundtables to just take these very valuable insights that are coming from these pilots and talk as a community about what we do think can be drawn as broader learnings, either within agriculture or even beyond agriculture. So I think there was a question: how are you planning to share supply chain information with retailers and consumers? Nick, you spoke to that a little bit. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add there.
I mean, there'll be an ability through the Better Cotton platform to be able to, if the permissions allow from the suppliers and they're happy to share information, for there to be a supply chain mapping feature with that. So it all depends on, as I said before, when we had our conversation, on the engagement of retailers and brands with their suppliers and the cascading of that message. So as part of the demand signaling, we are actually encouraging suppliers to share that information so that retailers and brands can have confidence in knowing who they're working with. Of course, that is completely optional, but there's also been quite a drive from retailers and brands and suppliers that they want to work more closer together, more collaboratively. So having that mapping and understanding of who each other is something that can benefit those relationships. So yeah, we do see that happening in the future, but it is going to be an optional thing and likely be a bit of a journey to get to that point. But when we do go live, we are going to be with some select retailers and brands providing that option, and then as we go further into traceability in the years to come, that should become more business as usual.
And I think, Aaron, from Yes, I'd just like to say, from a transparency perspective, and we're just at the very beginning of our journey of assessing, of building capacity, so training, and then assessing facilities. And happy to say that we're actually doing our first independent assessments of a couple of yarn spinning mills this month in Pakistan, so that's exciting. But we'd like to have a publicly available lists of facilities that are conformant with the YES standard. So whether that's on our own website or whether we're able to leverage some of the open source facility information that's out there already, we want to try to be as collaborative as possible so that any conformant facilities, whether they get a checkbox in HIG or with Better Cotton or others, trying to make that information easily accessible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Patricia. I think that's a great point. And I think that kind of public list is going to be such a valuable offering for the community. All right, I don't think we'll be able to answer all the questions before we end the session. Some great questions here. Thank you so much for the participation. I think there was one, just taking questions in turn. There was one about how accessible is digital data collection at different levels of the supply chain for farmers and suppliers kind of downstream from cotton. So I think that's an interesting one for both Nick and Patricia actually to speak about from your perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Nick,
I can start
with you. Yeah.
I can start with farmers if that's helpful. We've spent quite a lot of time with Better Cotton farmers last week from different regions, predominantly Gujarat, Maharashtra and India. And we were asking questions just like this because we're trying to better understand data collection in the field. And we were looking at things like smartphone penetration, for example. And this ranges quite considerably from around 60 to 80 or 90% in farming communities. And there's a lot of usage of tools such as Telegram to cascade communications to them. But for the interest of data collection, it's something that we don't think it's going to be necessarily a completely comprehensive digital method of collecting that data, and we'll need to factor in like smartphone penetration as well as digital literacy from a farming community perspective. So that's something that we're currently working on within the program. So it's nothing that I can update on just yet, but we're doing that research phase at the moment. For suppliers, the data collection feels quite advanced from their perspective, and there's, especially once you get beyond sort of GINA level, any of the information that GINAs are collecting as well is usually very comprehensive and meets our current chain of custody guidelines, which are things like maintaining farmer lists, for example. So yeah, it's something that we've seen quite a lot of confidence in and something that we do regular checks on as well. Patricia, would you like to add anything from your experience?
Well, I guess right now, as we look at all the transactions that are coming into a facility, not just something connected to a particular product. And there's, quite a lot of confidentiality that happens around that. So I think we'll be able to collect data more in an aggregated sense, just to start having really an understanding of cotton flows in more detailed manner. But then when it comes to real specific facility data, I think they'll get to choose what they want to share. It's not something that we'll be probably sharing for particular facilities.
But I think also in your experience, Patricia, correct me if I'm wrong, you have found that there's, at least where kind of larger suppliers are concerned, there is already, as you were saying before, pretty significant data collection systems and mechanisms in place at the facilities that can kind of be plugged in.
Right. There, for example, with a cotton laydown of various bales are laid down, so those facilities know where cotton originates
Right.
and can provide it upon request, as well as the cotton that they're receiving is typically, though there's some typical some sort of reference to the gin that it originates in, or that you can provide gin ID, or bale ID numbers if needed. So, and all of that is very carefully tracked because the characteristics and the quality is all based on that. I also saw a reference of reconciling, invisible waste. And when we did our research, we looked at all the different types of fiber and where it all goes and how waste is used, including, what percentage of invisible waste. So when we look at reconciling all the fiber, we do give a percentage for that kind of waste. So that kind of data is collected within. I think I was referencing how much would we be making available publicly.
Right.
And that's where I think we really just have to respect more of the confidentiality of the facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we are at the top of the hour. We didn't get to a couple of the questions around digital markers. There's an interesting question here around the data elements that the digital markers will contain. So I think that's something we could circle back and offer a little bit more information on, as well as a question around the relationship of better cotton to GOTS and the potential value of digital markers at the post-consumer stage, which is not a focus of the Streams project, but is a very interesting question indeed, and something that be worth exploring a bit, I think. So thank you for that question. I want to thank very much Patricia Jurowitz and Nick Sexton for joining us for this Streams webinar and engaging in this super interesting discussion. I hope it was interesting for all attendees. I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint slide here that will provide my email and the Streams website for anybody who's interested in reaching out and learning more about the Streams project. I also want to thank the U.S. Department of Labor for their funding of this project, and the OECD, again, for the opportunity to offer this session. And I am currently trying to figure out how to share the proper slide. So hopefully I'm doing this correctly. Yes. All right. So I'll just leave this up for a minute or two. But we will close the session. Thank you so much.